Picture this. You are pressed against a wall of cold black glass on a moon called HFY, and the only thing between you and the floor of the open hall of inquiry is a single transparent panel that is held for 900 years. Below you, on the polished obsidian floor, Hunter Prime S. Sorkath of the Drenig Compact is uncoiling the net. It is not a net the way your people think of nets. It is a living thing. The mesh is woven from filaments harvested from the throat glands of 9 generations of compact priests, and when it touches the floor, it hums. The sound is low. The sound is patient. The sound is the noise a contract makes when it is hungry. Across the chamber from S. Sorkath stands one human. He is old. He is unarmed. He wears a plain gray coat that does not fit him well in the shoulders, and he is holding nothing in his hands. No weapon, no document, no ceremonial staff, no escort. Behind him, the human delegation tier is empty. They were not permitted to enter. Earth sent one man and one man only, and that man is now standing 6 steps from a net that has acquired the freedom of 47 sapient species over 4,000 years. I am Hestaru of the 9th Observatory. I am a Volcrate xenoanthropologist. I have catalogued the deaths of 43 species in this exact chamber, and I am telling you now, as one observer to another, that I expected this to be the 44th. We always picture the great predator civilizations as fanged armies with fleets of black ships. The reality is standing right here. The Drenig Compact does not need fleets. They have something better. They have law. 4,000 years of layered, sealed, witnessed, sacrosanct law, and the centerpiece of that law is the thing humming on the floor. If Brennan steps onto that floor, the net owns him. Forever. It will bind his species' colonial claim, his estate, his name, and his future grandchildren to the Compact's hunting registry. He will be transferred to a Drenig estate within 17 rotations and live out the remainder of his days as a registered possession. If he refuses to step onto that floor, his entire colony of 214,000 humans is legally forfeit. This is the trap. This is the inquiry. This is what the Compact has done 47 times before, and 47 times the chamber has filled with the slow hum of the net, and 47 times the witness galleries have left in silence. I am pressed against the glass. My 4 hands are flat against it. My breathing membrane has closed, which is something it only does in mourning. And the question I cannot stop asking myself, the question every observer in every tier of this hall is asking themselves, is this: why did the humans send an old man with no weapon? What does a species do when it sends an unarmed elder to face a legalized monster? What did Earth think this was going to accomplish? Brennan has not moved. He has been standing in that same position for 11 minutes. His coat is wrinkled. His hands are at his sides. He is looking at S. Sorkath the way a man looks at weather. S. Sorkath finishes uncoiling the net. The hum deepens. The chamber lights dim, as they always do, to signal that the binding formula is about to begin. I have seen this moment 43 times. I have never seen it end any way but one. What happens in the next 600 seconds will overturn 4,000 years of interstellar law, end a hunting tradition older than my species' written language, and force the Volcrate Central Archives to seal this record for 200 years before anyone is permitted to speak of it again. But before we get there, you have to understand what the Compact is. You have to understand what the net is. You have to understand why an old human lawyer was the only weapon Earth had left. So sit with me in the observation tier. Press your hands against the glass. I will tell you what I saw. Part 2. Before I continue, I have to be honest with you about something, because the Volcrate scholarly tradition demands honesty between a recorder and a reader. This record was not supposed to exist. What I am telling you now was sealed in the central archives of my homeworld for 196 standard years. I am breaking that seal by speaking to you. There are 17 Volcrate laws I am violating with each sentence. I have made peace with this. I am old now, older than Brennan was when he stood on that floor, and I have come to believe that some silences are heavier than the punishment for breaking them. The reason this record was sealed is not because the events were classified. The events were public. 40 galleries of witnesses watched what happened in the open hall of inquiry that day. The recordings exist. Any sapient with access to a basic legal archive on a neutral world can pull the unedited footage. What was classified was the conclusion. The Volcrate Central Archive sealed my record because of what I wrote at the end of it. They sealed it because of what I admitted about my own people. They sealed it because once you understand what Brennan did, you cannot help but ask the same question about every empire you have ever lived under. And the Volcrate Council decided, very calmly, very rationally, that this was not a question they wanted their citizens to ask. So they buried it. They buried me with it in a way. I was reassigned to a survey post on a moon that does not appear on most charts. I have spent the last 170 years there, watching ice form on rock, thinking about an old human in a gray coat. I am telling you all of this because, if you keep listening, you are going to learn something that contradicts everything the compiled species index has ever said about humans. The index lists humans as Tier 4 sapients, mid-range cognition, mid-range aggression, notable for emotional volatility, notable for short individual lifespans, notable for a tendency to form attachments that exceed reproductive necessity. The index recommends caution in trade negotiations and notes that humans are easily provoked, easily flattered, and easily outmaneuvered in formal proceedings. The index is wrong. The index is wrong in a way that matters. The index was written by species who assumed that intelligence is measured by how quickly you can answer a question. Humans are measured by something else. Humans are measured by which questions they are willing to ask. I did not understand this when I first entered the observation tier of Kershvel. I had read the index. I had cataloged 43 species deaths in that chamber. I believed, as every observer believed, that I was about to watch a 44th. I want you to understand the size of my mistake. I want you to understand it the way I came to understand it, slowly, painfully, over the course of 600 seconds in a black glass room. So I am going to take you back, not to the day of the inquiry, to 11 days before it, to the moment Earth received the compact's summons and had to decide what to do. Because the real story does not begin with the net on the floor. The real story begins with a question no one on Earth wanted to answer. Who do we send to die? Part 3. To understand what Brennan walked into, you have to understand the Drennig Compact, and to understand the Compact, you have to abandon almost everything your species thinks it knows about predators. The Drennig do not hunt for food. They have not hunted for food in 4,000 years. They are a reptilian species, broad-shouldered, slow-blinking, with a third eyelid that closes from the side and a vocal architecture that produces a sound somewhere between a sermon and a low engine. They live, on average, 300 standard years. They are patient the way mountains are patient. They hunt for acquisition. The Compact's foundational text, the Vrenkadren, was written by their first speaker of law during a famine so severe it nearly ended their species. The speaker proposed a simple solution. Instead of killing rivals, the Drennig would acquire them. Instead of seizing land, they would inherit it. Instead of war, they would have inquiry. The text is 47,000 verses long. I have read it 3 times. It is, in its own brutal way, a work of genius. Every loophole is sealed. Every contradiction is anticipated. Every escape route is closed before the prey knows they are prey. The compact net is the centerpiece of this text. The net is not technology. It is closer to a sacrament. It is woven from the throat glands of 9 consecutive generations of compact priests, and the binding it performs is not physical. It is legal. It is metaphysical. It is the kind of binding that holds because every signatory civilization in this region of space has agreed over 4,000 years of treaties that it holds. The net activates only on a being who steps onto contested ground of their own volition. That phrase, that single phrase, of their own volition, it is the heart of the entire compact. The Drennig will tell you if you ask them that this phrase is what separates them from barbarians. They do not kidnap. They do not coerce. They simply invite, and the prey, faced with the compact's layered legal architecture, walks onto the floor by choice. 47 species have walked onto that floor. I have cataloged the smell of their fear. It is different for each species. The Greshey smelled of burnt sugar. The Tanavar smelled of wet rope. The Alun produced no smell at all, but their light patterns dim to a frequency we do not have a word for in any language I speak. The humans, I would later learn, smelled of salt and a faint metallic tang that I have since identified as a hormone their bodies produce in extended states of controlled fear. Controlled fear, remember that phrase, it will matter later. The compact's acquisitions are displayed on a wall in their capital. 47 species, 47 sealed registries, 47 civilizations who now pay tribute, ship resources, and surrender citizens to Drennig estates under the terms of their inquiry losses. The Greshey lost their entire homeworld's mineral rights. The Tanavar lost their orbital infrastructure. The Alun lost the right to reproduce without compact permission, which is a horror I will not describe further. No one has ever survived an inquiry once invited. No one has ever refused an inquiry and kept their colony. The compact does not need fleets. The compact has the net, and the net has the law, and the law has 4,000 years of witness signatures from species who were too afraid, or too tired, or too politically fractured to challenge a single sentence of the Vrenkadren. This is what Earth was facing when the summons arrived. 11 days, one representative, one unarmed human alone on a floor designed to swallow civilizations. The galaxy did not laugh when the summons was issued. The galaxy went quiet. 40 species had been here before. They knew what was coming. And then Earth submitted its representative. And then the galaxy laughed. Part 4. The summons arrived on a Tuesday. I mention the day because the humans mention the day in every account of this event that survives in their private archives. They are a species that remembers days. They attach meaning to the rotation of their homeworld in ways my people find quaint, and which I have come, in my long retirement, to find beautiful. The summons was triggered by a colony, a small one, 12,000 humans on a marginal world called Haverson's Reach, which the compact had identified as falling within an ancient sphere of influence claim. The Drennig had registered 900 years before humans achieved spaceflight. The compact did not want the colony. The compact wanted 3 specific humans on it. The summons named them: a geneticist, a child of 9 years, and an elderly woman who had once been a judge on Earth. The compact's stated rationale was that these 3 individuals carried genetic and intellectual material the compact wished to acquire for its estates. This is the part that mattered. The colony refused. This had never happened before. 47 species, when faced with a compact claim on individuals, had surrendered the individuals. It was understood. It was the cost of avoiding inquiry. You gave up the named persons, and the compact, satisfied, retracted the colonial threat. The named persons disappeared into the estates. Their families mourned. Life continued. The humans refused. Within 6 hours of the refusal reaching Kershvel, the compact invoked the inquiry clause. Now here is the cruelty. Here is the part that took me years to fully understand. The inquiry clause is not a punishment. The inquiry clause is a gift. The compact framed it that way in every public statement. They were offering Earth a chance to defend its refusal through formal proceedings. They were being generous. They were being civilized. All Earth had to do was send a single representative to the open hall of inquiry on Kerschwell, who would stand on the contested ground and make the human case. But the contested ground was the net. To make the case, the representative had to step onto the floor. To step onto the floor was to enter the net. To enter the net was to lose, regardless of what argument followed. And if Earth refused to send a representative, then the refusal itself was legally binding evidence of forfeiture. The colony, the named persons, and any future human claims in the contested sphere would transfer to the compact automatically, witnessed by every signatory species in the region. Refuse and lose everything. Send someone and lose everything. This is the mechanism. This is the trap that swallowed 47 civilizations. I want you to sit with it for a moment. I want you to feel the weight of it the way I felt it, watching the human delegations on long-range feeds, watching them argue in their parliaments and councils and emergency sessions for 11 days. I watched a human senator from a region called Brazil weep on a public broadcast. I watched a Chinese minister of foreign affairs go silent in the middle of a sentence and not speak again for 40 minutes. I watched an Indian prime minister say, very quietly, "We cannot send a soldier, because a soldier is a weapon, and a weapon is a forfeiture under Clause 9. They could not send a diplomat. The compact had ruled, in a prior inquiry, that diplomatic credentials constituted official representation, which was itself a form of surrender under Clause 14. They could not send a scientist, a scholar, or an elder. Each carried its own legal poison. Each was a trap inside a trap. The humans had 11 days, and every option they considered was a door that opened onto the same room. On the 9th day, a name was submitted. It was not a name anyone in the galaxy recognized. It was not a name anyone on Earth recognized either, except for a small circle of legal historians who had read his 3 obscure papers on contract contradiction in pre-spaceflight treaty systems. Marshal Thomas Brennan, 61 years old, retired, a widower, a man who lived alone on a small farm in a region of North America called Wyoming and who had not practiced law in 14 years. The galaxy received the submission and laughed. I did not laugh. I remember exactly what I did. I tilted my upper head crest, which is the Volcrate gesture for sorrow at a thing one cannot prevent, and I added a new entry to my catalog. Species 48, estimated time to forfeiture, 600 seconds. I was so certain, I was so confident in my catalog. I had not yet learned that the compiled species index was wrong. Part 5. Brennan arrived on Kerschwell 6 standard days before the inquiry. He came alone. This was permitted under the compact's hospitality protocols, though no representative in 4,000 years had ever traveled without an entourage. He carried one leather case. He wore the same gray coat he would wear on the floor of the hall. He stepped off the transport, looked at the moon's twin suns rising over the obsidian cliffs, and asked, in passable trade tongue, where the archives were. The compact official assigned to escort him paused. The archives representative. The foundational texts, Brennan said. The Vrenkadren. I would like to read them before the proceeding. I understand outside access is restricted, but the inquiry clause grants the accused representative full access to all relevant legal materials. I would like to invoke that clause. The official, a young Drennig of perhaps 80 standard years, blinked her third eyelid sideways. She had not anticipated this. No representative had ever asked. The texts were available in principle. The compact had granted access in principle for 4,000 years, but no one had ever come and requested them, because the texts were 47,000 verses long and the inquiry was 11 days away. She granted access. She had to, the clause was clear. I was watching from the observation tier even then. I had arrived early, as I always did, to set up my recording equipment and acclimate to the chamber's gravity. I watched Brennan enter the archive hall, sit down on a low bench that was not built for human proportions, and open the first scroll. He read for 6 days. He did not sleep more than 3 hours per rotation. He did not eat at the diplomatic banquets the compact hosted in his honor, which were, in their own way, part of the psychological architecture of the inquiry. He ate small meals in his quarters, drank water, and read. I observed him through the archive's transparent ceiling for most of those 6 days. I made notes. My notes were, I will admit now, embarrassingly wrong. Day 1. Subject displays pre-surrender resignation posture, hands trembling slightly. Reading speed indicates anxious skimming, rather than substantive engagement. Day 2. Subject continues fatalistic acceptance behavior. Has not spoken to any compact official since access was granted. Possible depressive episode. Day 3. Subject is performing ritual fasting. Likely a human cultural practice preparing for death. The trembling has stopped, which suggests acceptance. Day 4. Subject appears to be rereading earlier sections. Possible cognitive deterioration under stress. Day 5. Subject's posture has shifted. Note for follow-up. May be experiencing a religious or spiritual transformation common in pre-execution states. I want you to understand how completely I misread him. I want you to understand that I was considered, at the time, one of the foremost xenoanthropologists in the Vol-Crate scholarly system. I had 3 doctoral degrees. I had published 41 papers on sapient behavior. I had observed 31 inquiries in person. And I looked at an old human reading scrolls, and I saw a man preparing to die. What he was actually doing, what I did not realize until much later, was finding it. The contradiction. It was buried 4,000 years deep, in the 7th verse of the 3rd foundational scroll, written by the first speaker of law during the famine that birthed the compact. The speaker had written the phrase of their own volition into the Net's binding clause as a moral safeguard. The speaker had believed sincerely that this phrase would prevent the compact from ever becoming a tool of coercion. The speaker had been wrong. For 4,000 years, the phrase had survived because no one had ever stood on the floor of the hall and asked what it actually meant. On the 6th day, Brennan closed the last scroll, stood up slowly, stretched his back, and walked to the observation deck of his quarters. He stood there for a long time, looking at the gas giant Kersh-Vel orbited. The gas giant's storms were visible from his window. They had been raging for 90,000 years. Then he went to sleep. He slept for 11 hours, which was the longest sleep he had taken since arriving. The next morning he put on the gray coat. He left the leather case in his quarters. He walked, alone, to the open hall of inquiry. And I, watching from the observation tier with my 4 hands pressed against the glass, made my final pre-inquiry note. Subject has accepted his fate. Forfeiture is now inevitable. Species 48 confirmed. I want to find that earlier version of myself and shake him. I want to tell him to look more carefully. But I could not have known. None of us could have known. The Drennig had not known either, and the Drennig had written the trap. Part 6. The morning of the inquiry, the chamber filled in the order it always filled. The Drennig dignitaries entered first. 12 of them, in formal robes the color of dried blood, took their places on the compact tier. Hunter Prime S. Sorkath entered last among them, and the chamber's lighting shifted to mark his presence. He was tall for a Drennig. He had hunted in 7 prior inquiries. His 3rd eyelids were heavy with what his species considered confidence and what mine considers boredom. The witness galleries filled next. 40 species. I counted them as they entered, as I always did. The Greshey delegation in their copper veils. The Tanavar, who never sat in chairs and instead stood pressed against the walls of their assigned tier. The Alun, whose light patterns that morning were a steady, mournful violet. The Vol-Crate delegation, including my own observation team, took the 3rd tier on the eastern side. I want to describe the smell of the chamber at the start of an inquiry, because no recording can capture it. It is the smell of 40 species nervous systems all activated at once. It is sweat and pheromone and adrenaline analogs across 40 different biochemistries. It is the smell of an audience that has gathered to watch a death they cannot prevent. Brennan entered alone, through the accused's gate, exactly 17 minutes after the witness galleries finished seating. He stopped at the edge of the floor. He did not step onto it. This was procedurally correct. The accused was not required to step onto the floor until the binding formula began. Most representatives in prior inquiries had stepped onto the floor immediately upon entering, either from misunderstanding the procedure or from a strange, almost suicidal eagerness to have the thing be over. Brennan stopped. Brennan waited. As Sorkath uncoiled the net. I have described this moment already. The hum, the dimming lights, the way the net seemed to taste the air. I will not describe it again. I will only say that when the binding formula began, Brennan listened to every word. The formula is 43 lines long. It is recited in Old Drennig, a ceremonial language that has not been spoken outside this chamber in 2,000 years. Most representatives do not understand it. Most representatives have not bothered to learn it. Brennan had learned it. I saw his lips move slightly during the 17th line, which is the line that names the binding. He was reciting it along with S. Sorkath, silently, like a man checking the words of a song he had memorized. When the formula ended, S. Sorkath made the traditional offer. Representative of Earth, the contested ground is before you. Step forward and the inquiry shall begin. Refuse and forfeiture shall be recorded. The chamber leaned forward. 40 species, 800 observers. The witness galleries always lean forward at this moment, and they always lean back 600 seconds later when the net activates. Brennan did not step forward. He spoke. His voice was quiet. It carried, but it did not strain. He had spent 6 months learning how to project in a chamber of this acoustic shape. I would learn this later from his personal notes, which were released to the public archives 12 years after his death. Hunter Prime S. Sorkath, he said, before I step forward, I would like to exercise a procedural right granted to me under the Inquiry Clause. Specifically, the right of the accused representative to pose one question to the Speaker of Law before entering contested ground. The right is named in the 14th verse of the second foundational scroll. I believe it has not been invoked in 3012 standard years. I would like to invoke it now. The chamber went quiet. The Speaker of Law, who had been seated in the highest position on the compact tier, did not move for a long moment. I watched him through my recording equipment. His third eyelid was twitching. This is, in Drennig physiology, a sign of acute distress. He could not refuse. The right was real. The right was named in the scroll. The compact's entire legitimacy rested on the fact that every verse of the Vren-Ka-Dren was honored without exception. To refuse the request would be to admit that the foundational text was selectively enforced, which would be a greater catastrophe than whatever Brennan was about to ask. The right is granted, the speaker said. His voice was slow. Pose your question, representative. Brennan nodded once. He adjusted his coat. And then he asked the question that ended an empire. Part 7. Speaker of Law, Brennan said. I have read the Vren-Ka-Dren in its entirety. I have read it 3 times. I have studied the binding clause of the compact net, which states, in the 7th verse of the 3rd foundational scroll, that the net shall bind only those sapients who step onto contested ground of their own volition. I have studied the inquiry clause, which states, in the 2nd verse of the 11th foundational scroll, that a colonial entity refusing to send a representative to open hall proceedings shall be deemed in legal forfeiture of the contested claim, and all associated rights, persons, and territories shall transfer to the compact. The chamber was silent. Brennan paused. My question is this. If the compact summons a representative under threat of colonial forfeiture, and that representative steps onto the contested ground in order to prevent the loss of 214,000 of their people, by what definition of volition is that step ever voluntary? He stopped. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture. He did not look at S. Sorkath or at the galleries or at the net. He looked only at the speaker of law with the patient, slightly tired expression of a man waiting for an answer he already knew would not come. I want you to understand what happened in the chamber in the seconds after. For 3 full seconds, nothing moved. The net stopped humming. The lights did not change. The 40 witness galleries did not breathe, or whatever the equivalent of breathing was for each of their biologies. Then the speaker of law tried to answer. He opened his mouth, he closed it, he opened it again. He produced the first syllable of the old Drenig word for consent, which is vreka, and then he stopped, because the word vreka in the foundational scrolls is explicitly defined as an act undertaken in the absence of coercion. He could not finish the word. To finish the word would be to argue that summoning a representative under threat of 214,000 deaths was not coercion, which was a position the foundational scrolls themselves did not allow him to take. The scrolls were specific. The scrolls listed 41 forms of coercion, and threat of mass forfeiture was the third one named. He tried again. He tried to invoke the inquiry clause's own internal definitions. He could not. Every path he attempted led him to the same wall. If summons under forfeiture was not coercion, then the foundational definition of coercion was wrong, and 4,000 years of compact law was built on a defective foundation. If summons under forfeiture was coercion, then every step onto the contested ground for 4,000 years had been involuntary, and the net had never been a legitimate binding instrument, and 47 prior acquisitions were unlawful. There was no third path. The speaker of law sat in his high chair and could not speak. Hunter Prime S. Sorkath did not understand what was happening. I watched him. His third eyelids were fluttering rapidly, which is the Drenig equivalent of confusion bordering on panic. He looked at the speaker. He looked at Brennan. He looked at the net, which was still uncoiled on the floor. And then, in what I believe was the first uncontrolled act of his life, S. Sorkath lunged. He grabbed the net with both clawed hands. He hurled it toward Brennan, across the contested ground, with the full force of 300 years of Drenig hunting tradition behind the throw. The net was not supposed to be thrown. The net activated by sensing voluntary entry. But S. Sorkath had run out of patience, and patience, it turns out, is a thing even mountains can lose. The net struck Brennan in the chest. It did not bind him. It hit him and it slid off, and it lay on the obsidian floor in a heap of dead mesh. The hum was gone. The filaments were dark. The net had reached for a voluntary entrant and found none, because the entire chamber, in the silence following Brennan's question, had become legally contested ground. S. Sorkath himself had become an unauthorized presence on it. The net, faithful to its foundational programming across 4,000 years, had refused to activate on either of them. Brennan looked down at the net. He looked up at S. Sorkath. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply nodded once, the way a craftsman nods at a piece of work that has gone the way he expected. Hunter Prime, he said quietly, I believe the speaker of law is unable to answer my question. Under the 17th verse of the 4th foundational scroll, an unanswered question in open hall constitutes a legal void. The inquiry cannot proceed under conditions of legal void. I respectfully request that this proceeding be suspended pending review by the signatory species. The speaker of law, still unable to speak, nodded once. The galleries erupted. Not in cheering. The galleries did not cheer. They were not that kind of audience. They erupted in the small, devastating sounds that 40 species make when they realize, simultaneously, that the chains they have been wearing for 4,000 years were never locked. I sat in the Volcrate tier with my 4 hands flat against the recording panel, and I understood, in a single shattering second, that I had spent 30 years of my professional life cataloging a lie. Part 8. The Drennig Compact did not collapse that day. Empires never collapse in a day. They collapse in the slow rot of legitimacy, in the quiet meetings held in corners after the official sessions end, in the moment a young diplomat from a previously cowed civilization looks at the foundational documents her parents taught her to fear and realizes, for the first time, that they were always made of paper. What happened in the months and years after Kerschfell was this. The Greshey filed identical questions in their own pending inquiry, which had been scheduled for the following season. The Compact's speaker of law could not answer. The Greshey acquisitions of 900 years prior were declared unlawful by a coalition tribunal of 17 witness species. The Greshey homeworld's mineral rights were returned within 4 standard years. The Tanavar followed, then the Alun, then in slow waves the others. The Compact tried to amend the foundational scrolls. They could not. The Vrenkadren contained a self-sealing clause, written by the first speaker of law during the famine, that forbade any amendment which contradicted prior verses. The Compact's own genius had locked them out of their own escape. Every proposed revision was struck down by the scrolls themselves. Within a generation, the Compact's hunting tradition was legally dead. The Drennig themselves did not vanish. They continue to exist on their homeworld as a respected if diminished civilization. They produce, I am told, very good ceramics. Their young no longer learn the binding formula. The throat glands that wove the nets are now considered, in modern Drennig culture, a source of historical shame. Hunter Prime S. Sorkath did not survive the year. He removed himself from the Compact's active roster 3 weeks after Kerschfell, walked out into the obsidian cliffs of his homeworld, and was found, 12 days later, with the appropriate ceremonial markings for what his species called Vrentar, which is a death undertaken to expunge a stain on one's hunting lineage. I do not celebrate his death. I record it because the record is part of the truth. Brennan went home. He did not give interviews. He did not write a memoir. He did not, as far as I have ever been able to determine, speak publicly about Kerschfell a single time in the 4 years he had left. He returned to his farm in Wyoming. He repaired a fence that had been broken for 6 years. He took up beekeeping, which is, I am told, a human practice involving the cultivation of small social insects for the production of a sweet substance. He died at 65, of a heart condition that had been diagnosed before he traveled to Kerschfell, and which his physicians had told him would not be survivable for more than 5 additional years. He had known, when he accepted the assignment, he had known he was dying. This was, I came to understand much later, why Earth had chosen him. The Compact's legal architecture included a clause that allowed it to pursue representatives across borders for the remainder of their natural lives. Earth had needed a representative whose remainder was short. Brennan had volunteered. His 3 obscure papers on contract contradiction in pre-spaceflight treaty systems became, in the decades after his death, the most cited legal texts on Earth, and eventually, in 17 other civilizations. Schools were named after him. Statues were carved. A small moon in a system humans would later colonize was renamed Brennan's Reach. He never knew about any of it. The named persons on Haverson's Reach lived out their lives in peace. The geneticist became a teacher. The judge died of old age. The child, who had been 9 at the time of the summons, grew up and became a lawyer. She specialized in contract contradiction. I read her papers. They are very good. She never met Brennan. She wrote him 1 letter when she was 17 asking why he had done it. The letter was returned unopened because by then he had been dead for 2 years. I sat with that letter for a long time when I finally obtained a copy. I am sitting with it now, in a sense, as I record this. The question she asked him, the question he never answered, is the question I have been trying to answer for 170 years. Why did he do it? He was 61. He was dying. He had a farm. He had bees that did not yet exist but would soon. He could have refused. He could have stayed in Wyoming. He could have let Earth send someone else or no one, and the colony on Haverson's Reach would have been forfeit, and 12,000 humans would have been transferred to Drennig Estates, and the galaxy would have continued exactly as it had continued for 4,000 years. He went anyway. And I think, after 170 years of thinking about it, that he went because he had read the scrolls and understood that no one else would. He went because he was the one person in his entire species who had spent his life studying the precise kind of contradiction the compact was built on, and he understood that if he did not go, the contradiction would remain buried for another 4,000 years, and 40 more species would walk onto the floor. He went because the question needed to be asked, and someone had to be willing to be the mouth that asked it. Part 9. I am old now. I am older than Brennan was when he stood on the floor of the open hall. I have lived almost 3 of his lifetimes, and I have spent most of them on this small survey moon, watching ice form on rock, thinking about a gray coat. I want to tell you the truth I was sent here to forget. The Vol crate have foundational contradictions of our own. We have in our central legal code a clause that defines the rights of full citizenship. The clause is 41 verses long. It is, in its own way, a masterpiece. It guarantees the rights of every Vol crate born within the homeworld system to property, to expression, to participation in the central councils, to the protections of the compiled body of law. Born within the homeworld system. There are, at present, 470 million Vol crate who were born on colonial worlds outside that system. They are not full citizens. They have never been full citizens. The clause has been read for 900 years as excluding them, and every attempt to challenge that reading has been quietly buried by the central archives, in the same way my Kersh-Vel record was quietly buried. The contradiction is this. The same legal code in a different verse defines the Vol crate people as all Vol crate, wherever they may be found, under the protection of the central councils. The 2 verses cannot both be true. For 900 years, we have not asked which one is. We have known. We have always known. Every Vol crate scholar who has read the code has seen the contradiction. Every member of the Central Archives knows it exists. There has never been a generation in which the question was not visible. There has only been a generation in which no one was willing to ask it in a chamber where the asking could not be undone. This is what I learned at Kersh-Vel. The humans are not stronger than us. They are not faster than us. They are not, by any measure my discipline has ever been able to construct, more intelligent than us. The compiled species index was correct about their cognition. It was correct about their lifespan. It was correct about their emotional volatility. The index was wrong about only one thing. The index assumed that the species which survives is the species which can answer the most questions. The species which survives, I have come to believe, is the species which is willing to ask the question that ends the world it lives in. Humans ask those questions. They ask them on farms in Wyoming. They ask them in parliaments and in council chambers and in the quiet, exhausted hours of an 11-day deliberation when there is no good option and every door opens onto the same room. They ask them, and they accept what the asking costs them, and they go home and keep bees. The Vol crate do not ask. We have not asked for 900 years. I am asking now. I am asking by breaking the seal. I am asking by speaking to you, whoever you are, in whatever chamber or quiet room or transport bay you are reading this. I am one old xenoanthropologist on a survey moon, and my asking will not end an empire. The Central Archives will find this record. They will seal it again. They will perhaps add a few more decades to the original sentence. I have made my peace with all of this. But I have done what I can do. I have written what I saw. A human in a gray coat, a net that would not bind, a question that broke 4,000 years of law in 600 seconds, a man who went home and fixed a fence. The Drennig Compact taught the galaxy, for 4,000 years, that some empires are eternal because their foundations are sacred. The humans taught us in a single afternoon on a moon called Kersh-Vel that no foundation is sacred. Every empire rests on a question. Most empires survive because their citizens are too tired, too afraid, or too well-trained to ask it. The empires that fall because someone, somewhere, finally does. I am still waiting for our Brennan. I do not know if he will come. I do not know if my people are capable anymore of producing the kind of citizen who can read a 47,000-verse text 3 times and find the one verse that breaks it. I hope we are. I have, in my old age, become a hopeful creature, which is something I never was in my professional years. If you are Crate and you are reading this, I am asking you to read the Central Legal Code. All of it. 3 times if you can manage it. If you are human and you are reading this, I am asking you to remember that the gray coat is not a costume. It is a discipline. It is a willingness. It is the small, daily practice of asking the question even when the question is unwelcome, even when the asking will cost you, even when the room has been arranged for 4,000 years to ensure no one ever asks. If you are any other species and you are reading this, I am asking you to look at your own foundational documents. I am asking you to find the verse. There is always a verse. There is always a question. The empire you live in is held together, this very moment, by the silence around it. I sat in the observation tier at Kersh-Vel. I pressed my 4 hands against the cold black glass. I watched a 61-year-old human in a coat that did not fit ask one quiet question on a floor designed to swallow him. The floor did not swallow him. The floor cracked. And I have spent the rest of my life, every long day of it, trying to find the courage to ask my own.